I first saw Martin Hale in the back row of the community college auditorium, holding a padded cassette mailer against his chest, like it might stop a bullet. Nobody else noticed him at first. They were watching my daughter June stand beside a plastic tank of cloudy water, explaining how her filter pulled rust and grit through layers she had built with her own hands. I was watching the door. Old habits stay in a man. I had spent 32 years as a city bus mechanic, listening for bad bearings, before they screamed, smelling hot wire before smoke showed. When something is about to fail, it often gives you a small warning. That morning, the warning came in the form of a television light being clicked on behind us. Vivian Cross entered with 2 camera operators, a producer in a blue blazer, and the soft smile people use when they have already written your part. She was not famous the way movie people are famous. She was the woman whose name sat on hospital wings and charity walls, the donor reporters called when they needed a polished quote about children and hope. To me, she was the woman who had missed every fever, every court date, every school pickup, then arrived after all the hard years with makeup microphones and a story about being kept away. June saw her, and I felt my own breath lock. My girl did not step back. She wiped a drop of water from the table, capped her marker, and turned her body so she faced Vivian squarely. That was when Martin lifted the mailer. On the front, in black block letters, someone had written Ortiz/Cross/raw copies. I did not know yet that it held cassette backups from old recorders' SD cards, from newer cameras, timestamp sheets, and 1 resignation letter. I only knew the man carrying it looked ashamed enough to tell the truth. The producer asked if we would join a live charity segment. Vivian touched June's shoulder without permission and said for the cameras that the morning was about reconciliation. Then she looked at me. "Mr. Ortiz," she said, "will you finally explain why you isolated my daughter from her real family?" The room went quiet in the peculiar way public rooms do, with half the people pretending not to hear and the other half hoping they had heard wrong. I wanted to answer with 17 years at once. I wanted to say I had called Child Services the first night that I had filled out every form they handed me, that June had never been a secret in my life. She had been my calendar, my grocery list, my reason to keep the heat on. But June was not 8 anymore, so I held still. I let my daughter look from Vivian to the cameras to Martin Hale in the back row. Protecting June had once meant stepping between her and danger. That morning it meant making room for her voice. Vivian Cross did not raise her voice. That would have made her easier to answer. She moved through the auditorium lobby with careful gentleness, greeting the dean, touching elbows, thanking volunteers by name somebody had clearly put on a card for her. The camera crew followed at a respectful distance, catching just enough of her warmth to make the rest of us look ungrateful if we did not step into it. I had seen that kind of control before. Bus engines are honest when they are broken. People with money can make a broken thing look ceremonial. The producer introduced himself as Ben. He said the station was doing a morning feature on youth science and community generosity. Then he lowered his voice and added that there was a family dimension viewers would care about. I looked at June. She did not look at me for permission. She looked at the small red light on the camera, then at Vivian's hand resting near her elbow. "Please don't touch me unless I ask," June said. Vivian withdrew her hand as if June had hurt her. It was a beautiful little performance, quiet enough to seem natural, visible enough for the lens. Ben cleared his throat. "Mrs. Cross shared some background with us. She says there may have been misunderstandings when June was a child." "Misunderstandings," I repeated. Ruth Bell, our legal aid attorney, had not arrived yet. I wished she had. Ruth had the gift of making a room understand where the floor was. Without her, I could feel my temper looking for an exit. I kept it seated. June had learned calm from watching me fix buses with bad parts and worse budgets. I was not going to teach her panic now. Vivian opened a leather purse, not a document case, not some dramatic package. Just a purse expensive enough to pay my winter utility bill for several years. From it, she took a printed schedule. "We are not here to attack anyone," she said. "We are here to tell the truth about a child who was separated from her birth family and about a mother who never stopped looking." That was the first clean lie. Not the only one. Just the first that landed on the table. Ben said they had received clips showing June as a little girl crying beside one of my buses. He said the footage suggested I discouraged her from contact with outsiders. He did not accuse me directly, but the sentence had already been shaped for him. Isolated, hidden, dependent. Those were Vivian's words, wearing a reporter's jacket. I asked to see the clips. Ben looked at Vivian before answering. That told me enough. June took one step toward the producer. Her voice stayed even. "If you have video of me as a child, I want to know who recorded it." No one answered right away. Across the lobby, Martin Hale lowered his eyes. The cassette mailer bent slightly in his grip. Vivian smiled toward the camera. "This is exactly why the conversation needs care." June did not smile back. "No," she said. "This is exactly why it needs the whole tape." The tape Vivian wanted people to see began with June crying beside my bus. The truth began 11 minutes earlier at Bay 12 with an 8-year-old girl trying to trade handmade keychains for a ride she could not afford. I was closing the maintenance cage after a late repair. The last eastbound bus had already coughed out, and the building had settled into overnight quiet. I saw her near the vending machines with a shoebox under one arm. She had lined the keychains on the bench by color. Blue beads red, plastic hearts little knots of yarn. Her coat was too thin for the weather, and she was pretending not to be scared, because scared children learn fast that adults either move toward fear or away from it. "How much to get to Akron?" she asked me. I told her no bus was leaving for Akron that night. She nodded like she had expected the world to be closed. I did not take her home. I need that understood. A lonely man with a spare room does not get to become a father because a child is in trouble. I called the depot supervisor. Then I called the number our drivers used when a minor was stranded. Then I sat on the opposite end of the bench while we waited for the caseworker, because June flinched if I came too close. She told me her name after 20 minutes. She told me she was not lost after 30. After 40, she asked if people could get arrested for selling keychains without a permit. I said I was a mechanic, not a judge, but I thought the city had bigger problems. That made her laugh once a tiny sound she tried to swallow. The crying came later when a police cruiser rolled slow past the glass, and she thought she was being taken somewhere worse. I crouched 6 feet away and said, "Nobody here is mad at you, June. We are just trying to get the right grown-up in the room." That sentence was on the full tape. Vivian's clip cut it out. Years later, Martin Hale told me he had been across the street that night in a parked sedan hired to confirm a rumor that Vivian Cross had a missing child somewhere in the county. He photographed the bench, the keychains, the moment June wiped her face with both sleeves. He also photographed the caseworker arriving and me signing as a witness before I walked back to my toolbox. None of that appeared in the edited version. What people saw was a crying child near my bus, and me standing nearby in a grease-stained jacket. What they did not see was the distance I kept the calls I made, or the small shoebox I handed to the caseworker, because June refused to leave it behind. The first night I met my daughter, I did not rescue her. I stayed until the people with authority arrived. Sometimes staying is not dramatic. Sometimes it is just a man on a bench keeping his hands visible, letting a frightened child learn that not every adult takes what is not offered. For 7 months after Bay 12, I saw June mostly in offices. There was the county room with plastic chairs bolted to a metal rail where she sat sideways so she could watch every door. There was the visitation room with a faded mural of balloons, where a social worker observed us playing checkers and wrote notes whenever June changed the rules. There was the training classroom, where I learned about trauma from a woman young enough to be my daughter and old enough in sorrow to humble every parent there. I was 54, widowed and tired in my bones. I had a small house, a steady pension coming, and hands that could rebuild an axle, but shook when a form asked me to describe my support network. My support network was a neighbor named Mrs. Alvarez, a church I attended twice a month, and 3 bus drivers who would help anyone move a couch. It did not sound impressive on paper. The county did not hand me June, because I meant well. They checked my background. They checked my cupboards. They checked the lock on the bathroom door and the smoke detector in the hall. A licensing worker asked how I would discipline a child who lied, stole food, broke things, or screamed that she hated me. I said I did not know yet, but I would not hit her and I would not disappear. The worker looked at me for a long second, then wrote something down. June tested every word of that answer after she came to stay. She hid bread under her mattress until ants found it. She poured shampoo into the toilet because the smell reminded her of a group home. She called me Mr. Ortiz for almost a year. When she was angry, she put her shoes on and sat by the front door without tying the laces, daring me to send her somewhere else. I did not always respond perfectly. Anyone who tells you patience feels holy has not stood barefoot at 2 a.m. cleaning grape jelly off a hallway wall. I got frustrated. I took breaths in the garage. I called Ruth Bell once before she was my attorney, back when she ran a foster parent clinic, and asked if loving a child could include not knowing what to do next. It better, Ruth said. That is where most of the work is. The bus token came from a coffee can on my workbench. Old brass stamped by a transit company that no longer existed. I gave it to June after her first school meeting went badly, and she refused to get out of my truck. This is not money, I told her. It is a promise. You call, I come. You are allowed to be mad when I get there. She held it like a coin from another country. Nearly 2 years passed before a judge finalized what my heart had been practicing, carefully, clumsily, every day. By then, June still called me Caleb in public, but at night, if she had a fever or a nightmare, she called me Dad before she remembered to protect herself. Martin Hale's first report to Vivian Cross was dated 3 weeks after June moved into my house. I know that because years later, I held a copy and saw my life turned into tidy paragraphs. Subject resides with licensed foster placement Caleb Ortiz, retired municipal mechanic. Child appears cautious but physically safe. No observed contact with birth mother. Foster placement limits unnecessary public exposure. That last sentence became poison after Vivian's people touched it. Martin had been a police officer once, then a private investigator, then the kind of man who told himself work was work if the check cleared. Vivian hired him through a security consultant connected to her hospital network. She said she needed location updates for a sensitive family matter. She did not ask him to help June. She asked him to watch. He watched us at the grocery store while I taught June how to compare prices by ounce. He watched outside the elementary school when June refused to enter on pajama day because she did not own pajamas she trusted people to see. He watched me sit in the truck with her until the bell rang, then drive her home, because some battles are not won by dragging a child through a doorway. His early photographs were distant. My pickup near the curb, June's backpack on one shoulder, my hand open, never pulling. If you wanted the truth, the pictures gave it. If you wanted a weapon, they could be cut down. Vivian wanted distance to look like concealment. She wanted caution to look like control. Martin told us later he understood that by the second month. He had followed worse people, he said. Insurance cheats, angry spouses, one administrator stealing from a clinic fund, cases with clean edges. June's file did not have clean edges. It had a child who startled at sudden laughter and a tired man counting cash at a pharmacy counter before putting one of his own prescriptions back. I remember that pharmacy day. June had bronchitis, and the antibiotic cost more than I expected. My knee was swollen, but it could wait. I told myself pain was familiar and her cough was not. Martin photographed me outside afterward, leaning against the truck until the dizziness passed. His report said foster placement purchased child's medication. Personal prescription deferred. Vivian's media team never used that sentence. They saved others. June, crying. June standing behind me in a courthouse hallway. June refusing to speak to a woman from a supervised contact office. Martin had written context below every image. Vivian's people learned to crop above the context. There is a difference between witnessing and caring. Martin lived in that difference for years. He mailed invoices. He backed up files. He drove home to his own quiet apartment and told himself interfering would only make things worse. Maybe sometimes that was true. Often it was cowardice wearing a practical coat. When he walked into the showcase with the cassette mailer, I did not see a hero. I saw the man who had stood outside our life with a camera while my daughter learned to sleep through the night. But I also saw his hands shaking. Truth can arrive late and still matter. It does not arrive clean. The first thing June broke on purpose was Mrs. Alvarez's kitchen window. She was 10 by then, small for her age, all elbows and watchful eyes. Mrs. Alvarez had corrected her for cutting across the flower bed, and June answered by throwing a pebble hard enough to make a white star in the glass. Then she ran to our porch, sat on the steps, and waited for the part of the story she knew. Adults got loud. Adults threatened. Adults packed bags. I stood in the doorway for a minute because my first feeling was anger, and my first feeling did not deserve to drive. That is something I learned fixing buses. If you grab the wrong hot part too fast, you burn yourself and still do not fix the engine. "Get your coat," I said. June's face closed. "Where am I going?" "Next door." She did not move, so I sat beside her on the step. It was October, and the evening smelled like leaves and wet pavement. Across the street, a sedan idled longer than it should have. I noticed it because mechanics notice running engines. But I did not yet know Martin Hale sat behind that windshield with a camera in his lap. "You broke something," I told June. "We are going to apologize, and then we are going to figure out how you pay for it." "I don't have money." "Then you have time. Leaves need raking. Trash cans need bringing in. Mrs. Alvarez has a garage that scares grown men." June looked at me as if I had missed the point. "You're not sending me back." There are questions a child should never have to ask, and still they ask them, because life has taught them to check the weather before trusting the sky. "No," I said. "A window is not bigger than you." She cried then, not soft movie crying, but angry, embarrassed crying that made her wipe her nose on her sleeve and hate me for seeing it. I did not hug her. She was not ready. I just waited until she stood. Mrs. Alvarez opened the door with her arms crossed. June stared at the doormat and forced out the smallest apology ever spoken in Ohio. Mrs. Alvarez accepted it with the seriousness of a judge and then handed June a broom. For 6 Saturdays, my daughter swept glass dust-sorted old paint cans and listened to Mrs. Alvarez tell stories about raising 3 sons who had all apparently been fools at 10. That was discipline. Not a speech about gratitude, not a threat disguised as guidance. A broken thing named honestly, a repair made slowly, and a child still given dinner afterward. Years later, Vivian's team used 12 seconds from that evening. They showed June crying on the porch while I stood over her. They cut out the apology. They cut out Mrs. Alvarez's broom. They cut out the part where June came home, left muddy shoes by the door, and asked if there was enough soup for 2 bowls. Martin had recorded the whole thing. His note beside the footage read, "Foster father maintains boundary without rejection." Nobody at the station planned to read that line aloud. By the time June turned 16, my house had learned her rhythm. The back door stuck in winter because she slammed it when homework made her mad. The second step creaked because she skipped the first one coming downstairs. The kitchen table had a pale circle from the night she built a science project on heat transfer and forgot that varnish also transfers. I loved every mark, though I did not always say it well. Age had started leaving marks on me, too. My right knee clicked when rain came in. My hands cramped around small screws. I could still fix an engine, but it took longer to stand up afterward. I began writing reminders on yellow notes and sticking them to the refrigerator. Blood pressure pill. Call school about lab fee. Ask June about Tuesday. That last one embarrassed me when she noticed. "You need a note to ask about my day," she said. "I need a note to remember Tuesday is the day you pretend you don't care how robotics club went." She tried not to smile and failed. The refrigerator became our family office. Her scholarship deadlines went there. My cardiology appointment went there. A grocery list with coffee rice light bulbs and not the weird cereal went there. When June was mad at me, she corrected my spelling in red pen. When I was worried about money, I moved bills under a magnet shaped like a bus so she would not see them first thing in the morning. She saw anyway. Children who grow up watching adults count money become experts at silence. June knew the sound of me opening envelopes after she went upstairs. She knew when I watered soup down and called it a new recipe. "I can get a job," she said once. "Your job is school." That is convenient for you to say. It is inconvenient for me to mean. We fought about that. We fought about college applications, curfew, my habit of waiting in the truck until she got inside any building, and her habit of pretending she did not like being waited for. The good years were not soft all the way through. They were real years. Real years have slammed doors in them. Martin photographed the refrigerator through the kitchen window one afternoon when I had left the blinds open. He told us later he zoomed in enough to read the notes. I wish I could tell you that shocked me more than it did. By then being watched had become one of those facts that makes sense only after it has already damaged you. June took her own photograph of the refrigerator before leaving for a summer engineering program. She said she wanted proof of how I organized chaos. I told her chaos deserved privacy. "No," she said, slipping the bus token magnet higher so it held the notes straight. "This is evidence." At the time, I thought she meant evidence that I was getting old. Later, when Vivian said I had isolated her, June opened that picture on her phone. There were no locks in it, no threats, just reminders. Attend parent night. Pack inhaler. Ask June what she needs. A childhood not hidden but held together by yellow paper and stubborn love. June's clean water project started with the drinking fountain outside the gym at Harding Middle School. The water came out brown for 3 seconds every Monday morning, and the boys made jokes about Russ building character. June did not laugh. She filled a bottle, held it to the light, and asked the principal what the district was doing about old pipes. He told her maintenance was aware. That answer made her more dangerous than anger would have. Anger burns hot and then asks for a chair. Curiosity gets a notebook. She spent 2 years learning filters, testing cheap materials, emailing engineers who mostly did not answer, until one retired woman in Toledo sent used textbooks. I watched June at the kitchen table, with charcoal dust on her fingers and an expression that reminded me of every mechanic I respected. She did not want magic. She wanted a system people without money could repeat. When the community college announced she had won a scholarship and a spot at the regional showcase, Vivian Cross's office called within 48 hours. Not Vivian herself, an assistant with a polished voice. She said Mrs. Cross had followed June's inspiring journey and hoped to support the project with publicity. There could be a donor plaque, maybe a short video, nothing intrusive. Just a way to connect June's work with a broader commitment to community health. June listened on speaker while I stood by the sink. "How did Mrs. Cross get this number?" she asked. The assistant paused. That pause told June more than any answer. She thanked the woman and said no. Then she wrote an email to the scholarship coordinator stating that no donor name should be attached to her project without her consent. I read it after she sent it because my daughter had inherited my stubbornness and improved the grammar. "You could have let Ruth look it over," I said. I know what I mean. Meaning it clearly helps. I was clear. She was. The coordinator called the next day sounding nervous, then relieved. Vivian's office had indeed offered to sponsor the showcase's hospitality table, but the college agreed to keep June's project separate. No plaque, no staged gratitude. That did not make Vivian retreat. People who confuse access with affection often treat a boundary as a locked door they are entitled to open. Martin's report from that week included photographs of June carrying PVC pipe into the garage and me holding the ladder while she fixed a leak in her test rig. He wrote that the child, now adolescent, demonstrated independent academic direction. He also noted that she declined contact through donor channels. Vivian's people ignored the first sentence and sharpened the second. To them, no sounded like evidence that I had turned June against her. They could not imagine a girl choosing her work over a spotlight. They needed me to be the wall, because June, as the door, made them uncomfortable. The morning of the showcase, June wore a gray blazer from a thrift store and the bus token on a chain under her shirt. Before we left, she checked the refrigerator list and added one note in her own square handwriting. Let me answer first. I saw it. I did not argue. I learned about the edited tape from a block number on a Sunday night. June was in the garage running water through her filter for the 100th time, trying to make the flow rate steadier. I was at the kitchen table with a heating pad on my knee, sorting screws into jars, because a man who cannot control much will sometimes organize washers by size. The phone buzzed once. Check what they plan to air. Ask for the whole sequence. Do not let them use Bay 12 without timestamp. There was no name. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Then I called Ruth Bell. Ruth had become our attorney, the way some people become family gradually through emergencies. She helped me understand school discipline letters, medical consent forms, adoption paperwork, when it was time, and later the small legal storms that come. When a child with an unknown past becomes a young woman with records people want to interpret. Ruth did not make grand promises. She asked for documents. She distrusted adjectives. I loved her for that. Forward it to me, she said. Do not call the number. You think it's real? I think someone wants you afraid. Fear is not proof, but it is information. The next morning, Ben from the station confirmed they had received background video from Vivian's communications team. He sounded uncomfortable when Ruth asked for copies. He said the material was part of a planned live interview about a long-separated mother and daughter. He said no accusations had been finalized. Ruth asked him whether kidnapper had appeared in any prep notes. Silence can answer. June came in from the garage wiping her hands on a towel. I wanted to hide the conversation from her for one more hour, maybe one more day, maybe forever. That is the selfish part of protection. You tell yourself you are sparing your child pain, when sometimes you are sparing yourself the sight of it landing. What happened? She asked. I told her. She sat down slowly. Not because she was weak, because a person needs a chair when she learns strangers have been editing her childhood for television. Which clip? She asked. Bay 12, we think. Maybe the porch, maybe school. Her face changed on the word school. She knew how many ugly little moments a camera could make from a frightened kid who did not yet trust love. Did you ever keep me from her? June asked. The question hurt, but not because she doubted me. It hurt because she deserved the answer out loud. No, I followed what the county told me. When contact was offered through proper channels, I showed up. When you said no within those channels, I did not punish you for it. She nodded once. That night, another message came from the block number. I have originals. I need to bring them in person. I was paid by Cross. I am sorry. June read it over my shoulder. The garage pump clicked off and the house seemed to hold its breath. Tuesday morning, she said. We can refuse the interview. No, June said. We can refuse their story. Martin Hale came to my house at 6:12 on Monday evening and stood on the porch like a man with no right to knock. He was thinner than I remembered from the auditorium, with gray in his beard and a rain spot on one shoulder of his jacket. In both hands he held the padded mailer. Behind him, Mrs. Alvarez pretended to water a plant that had died 3 summers earlier. She had appointed herself neighborhood witness, and I did not ask her to leave. "Mr. Ortiz," Martin said, "I owe you more than an apology. I brought what I have." "What you have," I said, "or what Vivian lets you have." He flinched. Good. Some questions should touch bone. Ruth was already at the kitchen table with a legal pad. June sat beside her, arms folded, the bus token chain visible at her collar. I let Martin in because June nodded. That mattered. If she had said no, the mailer could have sat on the porch until morning. He placed it on the table and took out the contents one at a time. 6 cassette tapes in cracked plastic cases. A stack of SD cards labeled by year. Printed indexes. Payment receipts. A resignation letter addressed to the investigative firm that had subcontracted him for the cross account. "I kept backups," he said. "At first because clients lie. Later because I was afraid she would." Ruth did not touch anything until she had photographed the table. "Start with scope." Martin swallowed. "I was asked to document June's location, visible welfare school attendance, public contact, and any interaction with Caleb Ortiz that could suggest undue influence." "Could suggest," Ruth repeated. "That was the phrase." June looked at him without blinking. "You watched me for money." "Yes." "When I was a child." "Yes." "When I was sick. When I cried. When I didn't know who was safe." Martin's voice dropped. "Yes." There was no forgiveness in the room, not then. What filled the kitchen was uglier and more useful, the truth stripped of Vivian's lighting. Martin explained how the early cassette recorders had been used from his car, how he later moved to digital cameras, how he logged every contact attempt and supervised refusal. He had audio of me calling the county from Bay 12. He had footage of the caseworker arriving. He had the porch window incident with Mrs. Alvarez's apology plan intact. He had years of ordinary proof that June was not hidden. She was enrolled, treated, counseled, challenged, celebrated, and allowed to say no. "Why now?" I asked. He looked at June, then back to me. "Because they sent me a cut for verification. They removed every minute that made you look careful. They removed every word that made June look like a person." June stood and walked to the refrigerator. She touched one yellow note, the one reminding me to pick up printer ink for her showcase poster. "You don't get to be brave because you waited until the cameras came," she said. Martin nodded. "I know." Ruth sealed the originals in evidence bags from her briefcase, plain plastic with white labels. "We proceed with facts," she said. "No revenge, no guesses." June looked at the mailer. "Facts are enough." Ruth would not let us open Martin's index at my kitchen table. "This belongs somewhere with a copier, a witness, and bad coffee," she said, which was how we ended up in the legal aid office. After dark, 3 people under fluorescent lights reading a stranger's inventory of our life. The index was not dramatic at first. That made it worse. It was organized by year, then by location, then by subject. School pickup. County office, clinic entrance, community pool, Ortiz residence kitchen window, Ortiz residence rear alley. There were codes beside each entry, little shorthand notes Martin had used so he could remember what he had seen without admitting what it meant. June read faster than I did. Her finger moved down the page until it stopped. "He has my dental appointment," she said. Martin sat across from her, hands flat on his knees. He did not defend himself. "He has the day I lost the spelling bee." I looked over her shoulder. There it was. June, age 10, exited school visibly upset. Ortiz purchased ice cream. Subject later laughed. No contact with cross family observed. June turned a page. He has my panic attack outside the county office. I wanted to take the paper away. I wanted to put every page back in the mailer and burn the whole thing in the alley behind Ruth's building. But June's face stopped me. She was not asking to be spared. She was asking the room to stop deciding what she could survive. Ruth slid a yellow pad toward her. Mark what you want copied. Mark what you do not want used. You control that part. Do I? June asked. The question was not aimed at Ruth alone. It passed through all of us. Martin had watched her for money. Vivian had shaped the watching into a weapon. I had loved June, but I had also made decisions when she was too young to make them, and now every decision sat under fluorescent light, waiting to be judged by the person who had lived inside it. You should, I said. June looked at me then. Did you know anyone was watching? No. Did you ever suspect? I thought of cars parked too long at the curb, a man at the back of a school auditorium, a camera van that did not belong on our block. Sometimes I knew something felt wrong. I did not know what. She nodded and went back to the index. Vivian knew about my lunches, she said. She knew about my braces. She knew you were working overtime. She knew I was safe enough to photograph for 13 years. Martin's jaw tightened. He deserved worse than her accuracy, but accuracy was all she gave him. At midnight, June closed the copy packet Ruth had made and kept one page out. It was the entry from Bay 12. The line Vivian's team had cut from the tape was typed plainly in Martin's notes. Ortiz notified depot supervisor and child services. Maintain distance until caseworker arrived. June folded the page once. I want one night, she said, before anybody tells me what the truth should cost. The next morning, Ruth drew 2 columns on a legal pad. On the left, she wrote, verifiable. On the right, she wrote, do not say. June sat beside the window with Martin's index in her lap. The city outside was waking up in pieces, buses sighing at stops, delivery trucks blocking lanes, office workers carrying coffee like small shields. I had not slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vivian's smile turning my daughter's childhood into a charity segment. We need to be precise, Ruth said. Precision will feel too small. That is how we know we are still near the truth. On the left, she wrote county calls, caseworker arrival, foster licensing, adoption order contact records, school enrollment medical receipts, raw footage, payment authorization. On the right, she wrote, kidnapping, fraud, criminal conspiracy, abandonment, unless documented motive claims, mental health labels, revenge language. She tried to make him look like a kidnapper, June said. Then we show what the record shows, Ruth answered. We do not become careless because she was careless first. I hated how much sense that made. Anger wants big words. Big words feel like a weapon when somebody has been sharpening silence against you for years. But Ruth had spent her career in rooms where poor people lost, because rich people made the story complicated and judges got tired. She knew a clean fact could survive where a beautiful accusation could not. Martin asked if he should make a statement. June did not look at him. You should answer questions. I can apologize. You already did. Not publicly. She turned then. If you apologize on camera before you explain what you did, people will make you the brave man in the middle. I am not giving you that. Ruth put a check mark beside June's name on the pad, as if my daughter had just made a legal argument. We spent 3 hours building a timeline. Ruth made Martin identify every original file by source date and chain of custody. She made him say who paid him, who received reports, and when Vivian's communications team asked for emotionally legible clips. She stopped me twice when I used words that felt good, but could not be proven. Caleb, she said, I know you want to defend your life. Defend it with receipts. June listened quietly until we reached the plan for the studio. I speak first, she said. My first instinct was no. Not because she could not do it, because every father has a frightened little tyrant living in his chest, the part that thinks love means pulling the child behind him forever. I looked at the bus token on her chain and remembered the first promise I had made her. I would stay. I had never promised I would stand in front of her voice. "You speak first," I said. Ruth tore the legal pad sheet free and copied the 2 columns onto a clean page for June. "This is not a script," Ruth said. "It is a fence. Stay inside it, and they cannot drag you where they want you." June folded the page into her coat pocket. "Good," she said. "I am tired of being dragged. Local television studios are smaller than they look from home." The lobby had plastic plants and a security guard who kept glancing at Vivian as if donations could change the fire code. Behind the glass, people with headsets moved quickly. Vivian arrived in cream-colored wool with a pin shaped like a ribbon on her collar. She kissed the air near Ben the producer's cheek and thanked him for creating space for healing. June stood beside me in a dark green jacket, the bus token under her shirt. Ruth carried copies. Martin carried nothing. Ruth had the originals locked away. "Are you ready?" Vivian asked June. June looked at her for a long second. "For the interview, yes." Vivian's smile tightened. "That is what I meant." No, it was not. Vivian meant, "Are you ready to behave in a way that saves me? Are you ready to let my absence become a wound we both suffered equally?" The host was Marla, with the exhausted patience of someone handed a family crisis by a ratings meeting. She greeted Vivian first, then June, then me. When she reached Martin, she paused. "Mr. Hale is here as a records witness," Ruth said. Vivian's head turned sharply. It was the first unpolished thing I had seen her do. We sat on a curved blue couch under lights hot enough to make my bad knee throb. A monitor showed the segment title, "A Mother's Search." I saw June read it. Her face did not change, but her fingers touched the place where the token rested. Marla opened with Vivian's prepared version. A successful woman, a painful separation, years of searching, a daughter found at last. Vivian's voice trembled at exactly the right points. She said she had never stopped loving June. She said doors had been closed to her. She said some adults had made choices that deserved examination. Then Marla turned to June. "What was it like to hear that your birth mother had been looking for you?" June did not take the offered path. "Before I answer that," she said, "I want to know who gave your station video of me as a child." The control room went quiet behind the glass. Marla blinked once. "We received archival material from Mrs. Cross's team. Did you receive the full files or edited clips?" Ben shifted beside a camera. Vivian reached for June's hand. June moved it away before contact. "This is a sensitive process," Vivian said. "I do not think technical details are helpful right now." June leaned forward. Her voice was steady enough to make the room lean with her. "Technical details are the difference between a memory and a lie." Marla looked toward Ben. A producer's fear crossed her face, but something else came with it. Curiosity, maybe, or irritation at realizing she had been handed a stage wound and told to call it journalism. "We do have a short clip," Marla said carefully. Ruth's pen stopped moving. Vivian gave the smallest nod. On the monitor, 8-year-old June appeared beside Bay, 12, crying near my bus while I stood in my work jacket. The clip ended before my phone came out. It ended before the caseworker arrived. It ended before the truth had a chance to breathe. Before Vivian could name the clip as evidence of a crime, Ruth lifted her hand. "For the record, oui," she said. "Mr. Ortiz was a licensed foster parent before adoption was finalized by the court. Any word like kidnapper is public relations language, not a legal fact." That did not calm the room. It made the room more dangerous for Vivian, because now everyone understood the difference between an accusation and a record. For 5 seconds after the clip ended, nobody spoke. Those 5 seconds were the most dangerous part of the morning. A room will fill silence with whatever story has already been prepared for it. Vivian knew that. She let one tear slide down, then said, No mother should have to see her child so afraid and be kept from helping. My hands closed on my knees. I could feel the old mechanic in me looking for the broken part, the snapped belt, the leaking line. But there was no engine here, only a screen, and a lie shaped small enough for television. June turned to Marla. Please play the full 11 minutes before that clip and the 8 minutes after it. Ben stepped forward. We do not have that loaded. Ruth raised one hand. We provided the station with a copy this morning. Timestamp match source file identified and chain noted. Mr. Hale can authenticate the recording. We are not asking you to treat a private call as entertainment. We are asking you to correct an edited public claim. Every camera seemed to remember Martin at once. He stood near the edge of the set, pale under the lights. I recorded the original, he said. Vivian's voice sharpened. Martin, this is not the place. It is exactly the place, June said. Marla looked through the glass. Load the file Ruth sent. I will remember that sentence for the rest of my life. Not because Marla became a hero. She did not. She was a journalist who realized the safer path was no longer safe. But sometimes an ordinary professional choice opens a locked room. The monitor went black, then restarted from a wider angle. There was June on the depot bench with her shoebox of keychains. There I was across from her, too far away to be comforting and close enough to stay. The timestamp ticked in the corner. On the tape, my younger voice called the depot supervisor, then the county number. Then I told June no one was mad. We watched the police cruiser pass and her small body fold around fear. We watched me keep my hands visible. We watched the caseworker arrive with a badge on a lanyard and a clipboard under her arm. The clip Vivian had sent was inside the full recording, but now it looked like what it was a moment cut out of its moral frame. Then Ruth asked Marla not to play the next audio file. That was the attorney in her, and it saved us from turning truth into another careless spectacle. Instead, Marla read from Martin's signed index while the camera showed the matching invoice and timestamp, both stripped of addresses and private numbers. Initial contact made, Marla read. The mechanic notified authorities. No coercive behavior observed. Martin stepped forward when she reached the next line. His voice shook, but he did not hide inside it. The follow-up order came from Vivian's office, he said. Keep watching. Determine attachment. That was the instruction. The studio air changed. Vivian stared at the monitor as if betrayal had come from the machine itself. But the machine only showed what people had already put in writing. June did not look triumphant. That mattered to me. Triumph would have made the moment smaller. She looked tired and old, in the way children of complicated adults become old when the last excuse finally stops working. You knew he called for help, June said. Vivian opened her mouth, closed it, then looked toward the camera, searching for the audience she understood better than the daughter in front of her. June did not let her find it. Look at me, she said. Not them. Vivian looked at June the way people look at a door they thought they owned from the other side. I was afraid, she said. June waited. I was told you were unstable. I was told any sudden contact could hurt you. I was advised to gather information first. Ruth's pen moved once across her pad. Martin stared at the floor. For 13 years, June asked. Vivian swallowed. It became complicated. No, June said. It became useful. The host did not interrupt. Ben did not call cut. Maybe they were afraid of liability. Maybe they understood that the cleanest thing they could do was let the person whose childhood had been packaged finally describe the package. June pointed toward the monitor. You watched me cry. You watched him call for help. You watched me go to school, go to counseling, get braces fail, Tess win contests, slam doors, make up with neighbors, and come home. You watched enough to know I was alive. You watched enough to know I was not hidden. Vivian's eyes filled. I am your mother. I felt the sentence hit June. Not because it was true or false. Because biology has weight, even when it has not done the work. A child can grow up, understand everything, build a life, love the people who stayed, and still feel the old pull of the word mother. June breathed through it. "You are my birth mother," she said. "That matters. It does not erase what happened next." Vivian reached for a tissue. Her hand shook now, not delicately. The stage makeup could not make fear look generous. "I wanted to bring you home," she said. "Then why did you send edited video instead of asking me what I wanted?" No answer came. That was when June said the line that finally made the room stop treating the story as a dispute between adults. Watching me was not raising me. She did not raise her voice. She did not point at Vivian. She did not look at me for approval. The sentence landed because it was not decorated. Raising me was showing up at parent night after a double shift, she continued. It was making me apologize when I broke Mrs. Alvarez's window. It was sitting 6 feet away from me at Bay 12 because I was scared of adults. It was keeping every county appointment even when the forms made him feel small. It was telling me no when I needed no, and staying when I made staying hard. My vision blurred. I looked down because I did not want my tears to become the camera's next useful object. June turned to me anyway. "And Dad, this does not make me something you won." I nodded because my throat had closed. "I am not a prize for either of you," she said. "I am a person. I get to decide who gets access to my life now." The studio lights hummed. Outside the glass, someone wiped their face with a sleeve. Vivian had come to television to recover an image. June used the same cameras to recover herself. Vivian's people tried to move fast once the segment slipped out of their hands. A young man in a suit whispered to Ben. Another one checked his phone with the panic of someone watching donors become comments. Then Vivian did the thing people with money often do when truth costs more than they expected. She offered money. "There are programs I can support," she said, still on camera, because Marla had not ended the segment. "For June's research, for families, for reconciliation." The word reconciliation sounded rehearsed, but the fear behind it did not. June looked at Ruth. Ruth gave no expression at all, which was her way of saying the law could not make this decision for her. "Do you mean a scholarship in my name?" June asked. Vivian's shoulders lowered, slightly relieved to have found a familiar doorway. "That could be part of it. Across Ortiz Youth Innovation Fund. We can create something significant. I heard the trap before I understood it. A name on a fund. A picture at a podium. A future article where Vivian's generosity became the headline and June's boundary became a footnote." June heard it too. "There is already an aging out youth program 2 blocks from the depot," she said. "They helped me with college forms when Dad could not understand the online portal. They need transportation vouchers, counseling hours, and emergency dental money." Vivian blinked. "Of course. We can discuss branding." "No branding." The room went still again, but this silence had a different shape. It was not shock. It was people realizing June had learned how to put a door where a stage had been. "No cross name," June said. "No Ortiz name. No photo of me. No speech about reunion. If you want to help children who are aging out or caught between systems, help them without using them to clean your story." Vivian's mouth tightened. For a second, I saw the fight in her, the instinct to negotiate dignity down to something that could be printed on a banner. Then she looked at the monitor, at her own voice, telling Martin to keep watching an 8-year-old, and some part of her gave way. "All right," she said. Marla leaned forward. "For clarity, Mrs. Cross, are you committing to an unrestricted donation to that existing program without naming rights?" Vivian looked as if she had been asked to hand over a language she did not speak. "Yes." After the segment in the hallway, I asked June if she was sure. It was a foolish question. Fathers ask foolish questions when they are proud and frightened at the same time. "That could have paid for your lab," I said. My lab will be fine. You do not owe anyone nobility. I know. She leaned against the wall, suddenly looking 24 again instead of ageless under studio lights. But dignity is not cruelty, Dad. Martin stood 10 feet away alone with his coat over his arm. Can confession repair anything? He asked. June looked at him without softness. Repair is a verb. Start there. Vivian did not become humble on television and transformed forever. That is not how people work, and it is not how money works around shame. For 3 weeks, her lawyer sent language to Ruth that sounded like apology after all the bones had been removed. Vivian regretted pain. Vivian honored all journeys. June read one draft, slid it back across Ruth's desk, and said, she can keep that one for a plaque. The meeting finally happened in a clinic waiting room on the east side, because June chose the place. Not a restaurant where cameras could be hidden behind flowers. Not Vivian's office with donor photographs on the wall. A clinic with plastic chairs, a vending machine that ate quarters, and a volunteer desk. I sat 2 rows back. June had asked me to come, then asked me not to answer for her. Both requests mattered. Vivian arrived without a camera crew. She wore a gray coat and no pin. For the first time since I had known her name, she looked like a person who had not decided how the room should remember her. Thank you for meeting me, she said. June nodded. Vivian held a folded paper in both hands. I wrote something, but I do not think I should read it unless you want me to. Say it without the paper. Vivian looked down at the page anyway, then folded it smaller. I was young when I lost custody, and I told myself that explained more than it did. Later, when I had money, I thought money could replace courage. I hired people to watch you because watching let me feel connected without risking rejection. June's jaw moved, but she stayed quiet. When reports showed Caleb was caring for you, I should have been relieved. I was not. I was jealous. I was ashamed. I told myself I was gathering facts, but I was really gathering ways to stay important. That was the first sentence that did not sound polished. Vivian wiped under one eye with the heel of her hand. I edited the truth because the whole truth made me smaller. June looked at the clinic floor for a long time. A child cried somewhere behind a door. A nurse called a name. Life kept refusing to become cinematic for Vivian Cross. I am not calling you Mom, June said. Vivian closed her eyes. I understand. You can write to me once a month. No gifts over $50. No interviews about me. No contacting my schoolwork friends or Dad. If I answer, I answer. If I do not, silence is an answer. Vivian nodded after each condition as if learning a new procedure. Then June added the hardest one. And you do not get to hate him because he did what you did not. Vivian looked past her to me. I did not know what face to make. Winning had never been the point, but losing had almost destroyed us, so the difference was not clean. I do not hate him, Vivian said quietly. I envied him. June stood. That is yours to fix. Outside, she let me walk beside her without touching her shoulder. Halfway to the truck, she reached for my hand on her own. The bus token had started as a joke and turned into a promise before either of us noticed. During June's first year in my house, she kept asking how much a ride cost, even when no one was going anywhere. She did not trust free things. Free things in her experience came with adults changing their minds later. So I took an old brass token from a jar at the depot, drilled a tiny hole through the top, and put it on a chain. This one is paid, I told her. If you ever need to leave a room, call me. If you ever need me to come get you, call me. If you ever just need to remember, there is a way home, hold this. She wore it until the shine rubbed off. After the clinic meeting with Vivian, June stopped by my garage with a small paper bag. I was rebuilding the drawer tracks on my workbench because retirement had turned me into the kind of man who repaired furniture nobody else thought was broken. My hands were stiff that morning. I hit it badly. You are allowed to own a screwdriver that is not older than me, June said. This screwdriver and I have history. So do you and your knee. I still want you to replace one of them. She set the bag on the bench. Inside was the bus token, cleaned, but not polished, set into a flat keychain, with a strip of dark wood behind it. On the back she had engraved one line. The ride was paid by staying. I held it longer than I meant to. You do not want to wear it any more? I asked. The question came out smaller than I intended. Fathers can survive courtrooms, hospitals, and television lights, then get undone by a chain, leaving a daughter's neck. June leaned against the bench. Dad, I carried it because I needed to know I could call you. I still know. That is different. Yes. Different has always scared me more than disaster. Disaster gives a man a job. Different gives him a chair and asks him to wait. She picked up a loose screw and rolled it between her fingers. You think if I do not need you the same way I need you less. I looked at the keychain because looking at her would have finished me. Maybe. Anchors do not become useless because ships sail. I laughed once badly. You wrote that down first. 3 drafts. She hung the keychain from a hook above the bench between my work light and the coffee can full of bolts. It caught the afternoon sun and threw a small brass circle onto the scarred wood. There, she said. Now when you fix things, you can remember you already fixed the important one. I shook my head. I did not fix you. June smiled. Good. Because I was not broken. That was my daughter's mercy. She did not let me make myself the hero of her survival. She let me be what I had actually been, the man who kept the truck running. The forms filed the soup warm and the seat available until she could choose her own road. Martin's last envelope came by certified mail, which felt almost funny after 13 years of him taking pictures from cars and sidewalks. The post office clerk made Ruth sign twice. Ruth made the clerk watch her write the time on the receipt. Everyone was procedural by then. Procedure kept emotion from becoming fog. Inside were the remaining files Martin had held back from his firm raw media indexes, invoices, subcontract emails, and a list of every request Vivian's office had made after the first year. Some invoices had been coded through hospital network donor relations as family risk review, which was a clean phrase for a dirty use of institutional money. There was also a letter not to June, but to the state licensing board that governed private investigators. Ruth read it aloud in her office because June asked her to. Martin admitted he had followed a minor under a contract written so broadly it let curiosity pretend to be welfare. He admitted he had continued after the evidence showed June was safe. He admitted he had accepted work that blurred the real client, the billing source, and the private family purpose. He had let a wealthy client's office turn observation into pressure because the checks cleared and because guilt, when ignored long enough, becomes just another room a person learns to live in. At the end he wrote, I am not submitting this to be forgiven. I am submitting it because a practice that can watch a child for years without intervention needs rules stronger than my conscience. June sat with that sentence for a while. Do you believe him? Ruth asked. I believe he wrote it after being cornered by the truth, June said. That was fair. Fairness had become one of her sharpest tools. Martin started giving unpaid talks in a training program for new investigators. Ruth checked. He did not tell the story like a confession tour. He used forms, anonymized timelines, and the phrase lawful but harmful. He told students that legality was not ethics, that a child was not a subject line, and that a job funded through a polished institution could still be a private misuse of power. Refusing a client, he said, could be the only honest work that month. June did not attend. I did once, standing in the back by the exit. Martin saw me after and walked over with both hands visible. I noticed that. Men who have been ashamed sometimes learn small manners too late. How is she? He asked. That is not your question anymore. He nodded. You're right. We stood there in the hallway of a community training center while a custodian stacked chairs nearby. There was no music, no speech, no clean redemption. Just two old men near a soda machine, one who had stayed and one who had watched. "I am trying to pay back what cannot be paid back," Martin said. "Then do it without needing us to applaud." He accepted that which was the first useful thing I had seen him do without being forced. When I told June she was fixing a leak under my kitchen sink, because apparently engineering degrees do not protect daughters from fathers who over-tighten fittings. "Do you hate him?" she asked. I thought about the envelope, the years, the pictures, the way his fear had arrived late, but not empty. "Some days," I said. "Not all day." June tightened the pipe and looked up. "That is probably enough mercy for now." She was right. Not everyone who failed us had to remain an enemy, but nobody who failed us got to write the ending. June's next presentation was in a public school gym with a scoreboard that still showed last Friday's home loss and a microphone that squealed. No donor wall, no camera crew, no cream wool coat in the front row. Just folding chairs, poster boards, restless students, and the smell of floor wax. I arrived 20 minutes early anyway. The old habit stayed. I checked the exits, noticed which extension cord crossed a walkway, and found coffee so bitter it felt like a warning. Then I saw the paper taped to the first chair in the front row. "Reserved for my dad." Not Caleb Ortiz, not Guardian, just my dad written in June's square handwriting with a little arrow pointing down as if I might not understand chairs. I sat before my knees could argue. Around me, families filled the gym. A grandmother fanned herself with a program. A boy in a tie practiced his volcano speech. Two parents argued quietly about parking. Ordinary life returned without asking permission from our trauma. June stood near the stage beside her clean water model. She was speaking with a 7th-grade girl who had brought a notebook full of questions. I watched my daughter crouch slightly, so the girl did not have to look up too far. I watched her explain flow rate with her hands. I watched the girl nod like a door had opened. For years, I thought my job was to get June safely to rooms like this. I was not wrong, but I had misunderstood the size of the job. The point was not to deliver her to a future where nothing could hurt her. No parent can do that. The point was to help her hear her own voice clearly enough that when hurt came, she could still choose. Vivian wrote once a month. Sometimes June answered. Sometimes she did not. The donation went through without a name on the door. Martin's complaint became a training case. None of it made the past clean. It made the future less available to the same lie. When June's turn came, the microphone squealed and half the gym winced. She laughed, adjusted the stand, and began again. "Water tells the truth if you give it a path," she said. I did not know if she had written that for the project or for us. Maybe both. She explained filtration cost maintenance and why small systems fail when nobody budgets for replacement parts. Then she thanked the bus mechanic who taught me every system is really a promise to keep showing up. People turned toward me. I looked at the bad coffee in my paper cup until the attention passed. Afterward, June came down from the stage and tapped the reserved sign on my chair. "Good seat?" she asked. "Best one in the house." She smiled. "I saved it before I knew who would come." That is what family is, I think. Not blood by itself, not money, not a camera catching the part that flatters you. Family is the person who keeps a seat for you before the room knows you will matter. Love is attendance, not ownership. It is the hand that waits beside an empty chair, trusting the voice it helped raise to fill the room.